Introduction to Philosophy and Logic. Module 1. An Overview of Philosophy. Unit 1. Definition and Scope of Philosophy. 1.0. Introduction. This study unit introduces you to the definition and scope of philosophy as a discipline. The unit will focus particularly on the controversial nature of the definition or conception of philosophy. It will consider both the layman and academics' conceptions and understandings of philosophy. 2.0. Intended Learning Outcomes, ILOs. By the end of this unit, you will be able to define philosophy as a discipline, discuss the views about the conception of philosophy. 3.0. Main Content. 3.1. What is philosophy? You need to know from the outset that the term philosophy lends itself to many interpretations. Thus, the answer to this three-word question is not as simple as it looks or sounds. And because of the critical nature of the discipline, no one philosopher can define philosophy in a way that will be acceptable to every philosopher. Unlike other disciplines such as economics, history, political science, biology, etc., where students can give a straightforward definition of their respective discipline, this is not possible with philosophy. There is no such thing as the exact or univocal definition of philosophy. What we have seen from history is that each philosopher defines philosophy from his or her perspective, or that each philosopher defines philosophy based on what he or she perceives as the central problems, or what we may call the subject matter of philosophy. Since there are many problems or issues that philosophy grapples with, there are many definitions of philosophy. This may be the reason why Baudouin, 1981-12, advises a newcomer into philosopher who wishes to define or know the meaning of philosophy to always wait for one, as he would have to settle for one or achieve this by himself or herself later in the cause of his or her studying philosophy. Sometimes it is often argued that you define philosophy by doing philosophy. Although this approach may not be correct, because it is not in all cases that you need to practice something before you explain or understand it. For instance, someone interested in the definition of death does not necessarily need to die before he explains or understands it. If he is told that the only way to define death is to die first, he is likely to give up the attempt. Even if the best way to define philosophy is to expose you to the rigors of deep philosophizing, this remains partial. What you should always have in mind is that when a student of philosophy asks a question, "What is philosophy?" he has started philosophizing, and to philosophize is to wonder about life and about the fundamental issues that borders on human existence. 3.2. The various conceptions of philosophy. The problem with the definition of philosophy also arises due to the various conceptions and misconceptions, understanding and misunderstanding of philosophy. Because of this, the discipline has been given various meanings or definitions. This section focuses on the different conceptions or definitions of the discipline from various groups or individuals' perspective. This begins from professionals to the layman and by layman, I mean the average man in the street. 2.1. Underlaborer conception. This is in another word called the popular conception of philosophy. In this sense, the word philosophy is often used to characterize a person or a group of persons' attitude to life. Attitude here means the general pattern or the habitual way of response of the person to events. Also, attitude, in a more developed sense, characterizes a person's expressed or observed worldview, which may be the sum of his assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, and prejudices, which are partly inherited and partly acquired in the process of living. Ekinpolu, 1981-2. In this sense, everybody is a philosopher insofar as everybody has a philosophy of life, that is, an attitude towards life. When we claim to have a personal philosophy of life, it refers to either or both two senses that we sometimes refer. Thus, why in the street you often heard people saying, "my philosophy," "his philosophy," and so on. If you ask a common man, "What is your philosophy of life?" you will get answers such as, "My philosophy of life is to take things gently," or you can see here that when we talk of a layman's conception of philosophy, it simply means the sum of a person's beliefs, the main principles that control and guide a person's life. This view also suggests that at least most human adults have necessarily some philosophy of life, since it would be impossible to lead a human life without some forms of beliefs and definite principles to guide those beliefs. These includes, among others, various ideas about man and the supernatural realities, such as God's soul, spirits which governs human life and worldview. In Halverson view, this impression of philosophy is understood to have a very practical orientation. And a philosophy of life include views on such things as the nature of man and man's place in the universe, some convictions about what things are worth for, and so on. 1967-4. In this conception, the term philosophy also refers to the profound sayings of the elders which are witty and pregnant with meanings. It is underlaborer because it does not capture the sense in which philosophy is understood, technically speaking. You must also know that this conception of philosophy also includes what can be regarded as the principle or ideology of an organization, group or government, or the ways of running an institution or organization. Hence, we talk of the philosophy of National Open University of Nigeria, NOUN. And people sometimes says, no one understands the philosophy of this government, or the party lacks any philosophical basis. 3. 2.2. The master scientist conception of philosophy. This conception of philosophy is itself the result of philosophical doctrine that sees knowledge as exclusively depending on sense experience. Whatever cannot be observed or is not subject to objective verification cannot constitute knowledge. In more recent times, this philosophical doctrine has come to be known as scientism. This conception repudiates knowledge that is not based on scientific method of inquiry. This impression or conception extols the sciences and treats the humanities like a vast debating society or subject meant for those without serious academics or professional ambition. This conception is further a product of a lopsided view of technology. Most people tend to ascribe the credit for technological achievements to the physical sciences, whereas in fact technological progress is due to a combination of many aspects of human life, including politics, law, education, art, commerce, and philosophy. Lack of appreciation for this, according to Onig Binda, 1999-20, has made many to assume that only science, and no other field, can yield knowledge and understanding. However, the implications and the inadequacies of this conception is not far-fetched. The implication of restricting human knowledge to human experience is half-knowledge or lopsided knowledge. Reality goes beyond experimental and observable. This explains why the empirical disciplines cannot answer the question of purpose, why the universe exists in the first place. It is incompetent to explain the ultimate purpose of our existence or of the universe because of its empirical constraints. But to argue that such questions cannot be fruitfully investigated because they fall outside the ambits of the empirical sciences is sheer intellectual dishonesty. Therefore, for us to have a more comprehensive and all-embracing conception of philosophy, we cannot afford to cage ourselves within the limited walls of experience and observables. 3. 2.3. Clarification of concepts. In this conception, philosophy is reduced to the role of clarification of the meaning of words and concepts. When we use such words like justice, good, bad, beauty, ugliness, what do we mean? To the advocates of this conception, the function of philosophy is to clarify the meaning of such words. To them, philosophy is a specialized field, serving the sciences and aiding in the clarification of language, rather than a broad field reflecting upon all of life's experiences. Herald 1964-9. Certainly, this is one function of philosophy and not the main task or the only legitimate function of philosophy. To see it as the only legitimate function of philosophy is to have a narrow conception of philosophy, and therefore of knowledge. This is because it would limit what we call knowledge to statements about observable facts and their interrelations, that is, to the business of the various sciences. But we know that knowledge generally used is not the prerogative of the sciences. We know and do have knowledge of ethical and theological principles and other value-laden theories. However, other connotations of philosophy have been noted. In this vein, philosophy has been variously conceived to be the love for wisdom, the search for truth, the rational explanation of nature, the search for the ideal life. the concern with human experience and the reminder of familiar facts of everyday experience. 3.2.4. Philosophy as the love of wisdom. This connotation of philosophy is derived from the etymological meaning of philosophy. Etymologically, the word philosophy comes from the Greek words philos, philia, philion, which means friend, love, to love, and sophia, which means wisdom. Philia refers to such concepts as friendliness, affection, or any such concept conducive to the establishment of friendship between persons. On the other hand, Sophia, as understood by Aristotle, refers to the highest intellectual and especially philosophical excellence of which the human mind is capable, and which is the result of studying nature for its own sake. In this sense, it is translated theoretical wisdom. Onyeocha, 1996, 8. Wisdom consists in the constant and unwavering disposition to seek the truth. Philosophy includes both the seeking of wisdom and the wisdom that is sought. However, wisdom is used here as different from, though not opposed to, knowledge in the sense of amassed information. This is because one could be wise without having much knowledge, just as one could have a lot of knowledge without being wise. Wisdom in the philosophical sense is a habit of applying the intellect in a systematic way as a guide and a beacon in one's activities. It is more a matter of temperament and character than of knowledge. Ibid 11. In this connotation, the distinguishing mark of the philosopher that is friend or lover of wisdom is the premium he or she places on the application of the intellect at both the practical and theoretical levels of operation. A philosopher in this connotation is therefore one who believes in the efficacy of intellectual effort and who uses whatever knowledge he or she can command to benefit mankind. Socrates, in his conversation with Phaedrus, gives his criteria for ascribing wisdom to anyone, namely an originality of thought and a critical mind even about his or her own production. He says, if the work had been done with knowledge of the truth, if he could defend his statements when challenged and would demonstrate the inferiority of his own writings out of his own mouth, would be called not wise, for that pertains to a god but a lover of wisdom. Phaedrus 278d. In the Phaedrus, Socrates goes further to contrast true lovers of wisdom to those who merely parade themselves as lovers of wisdom when in actual fact they are mere lovers of words. He calls them copyists and writers of certain types of poetry. The type of poetry that Socrates disparages here is the type that manifests neither a profundity of thought nor a depth of content. Socrates also excludes from the realm of true philosophers certain types of law writers and speech writers who, in his words, have no other input than the juxtaposition and rearrangement of words and phrases in existing works. He calls them those who have nothing to show off more value than the literary works on whose phrase they spend hours twisting them this way and that, pasting them together and pulling them apart. Phaedrus 278d. 3.2.5. Philosophy as the search for truth. There is no gainsaying the fact that philosophy and indeed philosophers have a penchant for certain and indubitable knowledge. When René Descartes, a mathematician turned philosopher, declared his interest in philosophy, he was looking for a certain and distinct knowledge that can be certain and distinct as mathematical truths are. The philosopher shuns the mundane and the bizarre affairs of life and goes for the fundamental, the originality, the unstuffy of all there is wherein the truth of reality lies. The philosopher's penchant for the truth is best seen in the description of the philosopher as given by the Greek thinker and mathematician Pythagoras, c. 600 BC, when he likened philosophers to spectators at the ancient games. In the order of importance, the philosophers whom he compared with the spectators whose sole interest is the game itself are superior to competitors who are out to win prizes and commercials, who are out to make money from sales. Pythagoras had described himself as one who regards every aspect of reality with thoughtful attention for achieving a clearer, distinct, and more comprehensive understanding. Therefore, when Leon the tyrant of Phlius asked him who he was, Pythagoras replied, "A philosopher," and went on to compare life to the great games where some went to compete for the great games, where some went to compete for the prizes and others went with wares to sell. In his assessment, the best among them all were those who went as spectators. since their interest in the games is simply to relax and enjoy it, and get the first-hand information, the nitty-gritty of the game. He compared the situation with the situation in real life, where some grow up with servile natures, and others are greedy for fame and gain. Unlike both classes of people, the philosopher seeks for truth. Laertius 1925-11. The philosopher's superiority over these other classes of people lies in his constant disposition to spurn fame and profit and go for the truth. 4.0. Conclusion. Philosophy consists in the constant and unwavering disposition to seek the truth. In the light of this, Plato defines philosophy as a man whose passion is to seek the truth, a man whose heart is fixed on reality. According to Aristotle, philosophy is rightly called the knowledge of the truth. It is not out of place, therefore, to say that philosophy is synonymous with truth. Be that as it may, given the various conceptions of philosophy as outlined above, we submit with Omorigbe that philosophy is a rational search for answers to the questions that arise in the mind when we reflect on human experience. It is also a rational search for answers to the basic questions about the ultimate meaning of reality and of human life. 5.0. Summary. To get the best of this unit, you may need to repay it again. Also, drop a comment on the comment section stating the important lesson learned.